What is atheism anyways? According to dictionary.reference.com, atheism is the doctrine or belief that there is no God, disbelief in the existence of a supreme being or beings. According to Webster's Ninth New Collegiate Dictionary, which you may have at home as I do, atheism is a disbelief in the existence of deity, the doctrine that there is no deity. PhilosophyPages.com says that atheism is belief that God does not exist. Unlike the agnostic, who merely criticizes traditional arguments for the existence of a deity, the atheist must offer evidence. PhilosophyDictionary.org says that atheism is the denial of the existence of God. God does not exist. I think that going to philosophy dictionaries is probably a really good way to discover the meaning of atheism, since it's a very philosophically heavy, meaningful term. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, atheism means the negation of theism, the denial of the existence of God. These are all strong, assertive things. The University of Aberdeen's Glossary of Technical Terms also agrees and says that an atheist is someone who believes that there is no God. This doesn't seem like much of a debate, but what about some of the atheist websites? What do they say atheism is? On infidels.org, under the title What is Atheism?, it says atheism is characterized by an absence of belief in the existence of gods. At atheism.about.com, it is defined as not believing in any gods. These are very weak, very soft definitions of atheism. I wonder why.
Atheism. I don't think it means what you mean it to mean. Your words are confusing me when you put it that way. Why make it confusing when you can just say it plain? If you believe there is no God, just come out with a claim. Lack of belief in God makes your stance sound weak and lame. Atheism. You say that my baby's lacking a belief in God. Well, I can say the same thing about my lucky fishing rod. I don't need no big words to prove that concept wrong. So I thought I'd make fun of it, singing in this song. Atheism. Yeah. Philosophically, I think you may have missed that simply a lack of belief does not make an atheist. I'm not trying to make fun or suggest that we should hate. Just want to keep some other folks from making that mistake. Atheism. Yeah.
You're listening to the Bible Thumping Wingnut Show, the show that's safe for the whole family. Unless your family contains professing atheists.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Atheist Experience. I am Tim, the Bible Thumping Wingnut, and with me is Len Pettis of Grappling with Theology. This week we are excited because there is a special guest on the Atheist Experience, special guest, and we're going to be reviewing their conversation. This is the Atheist Experience, episode 22.08, Tracie Harris with Callie Wright. And they've got quite the show going on over there. But first, some promised reading of last week's feedback. We have that, but before we get to that, this is listener-supported podcasting and video streaming. If you like what we're doing here. With the Atheist Experience, a Bible thumping review of the Atheist Experience. If you like it, please consider supporting us financially. Go to BibleThumpingWingnut.com and click on support our ministry. You can support us monthly, which is awesome, or you can give a one-time gift through PayPal, or you can even mail something. So if you love us, if you like what we're doing, I would appreciate it. Please consider. And then also, while you're there, BibleThumpingWingnut.com, check out Len Pettis' podcast, Grappling with Theology, as well as a handful of other podcasts, all designed to be edifying and enjoyable. How's that? Len, how you doing?
I am well, brother. How are you?
I am good. This email came actually from our first episode, but it addresses you. So I wanted to I wanted to save it. It actually addresses both of us, so I didn't think it would be fair to read it last week when the guy with the eye patch was here.
Eye patch guy.
This is from, what's that?
Eye patch guy.
The eye patch guy. G-Man only gone one day, and you've taken his mantle of there's no such thing as atheists. Hard to believe that you two half-wits can be so dumb. It's like a battle to see who can make the most ignorantly stupid statement. You both win. You even go on to equate the Bible to science books and Egyptian history to your no evidence magic history. Then you talk about other Christians being stupid and gullible. Not you two geniuses, though. Nice one, Mr. Dunning-Kruger.
I asked John Brady if he was a pirate.
You asked him?
You know what I asked him. You know what he said?
Arr. What did he say? Unfortunately, you broke up there.
He said IR. But that's that silly joke aside. Thank you for your comments and your feedback. So yeah, I guess that people, the fool who says in his heart there is no God and atheists don't exist. And oh, by the way, before G-Man was a thing, we were saying that. So in fact, before G-Man was a thing, before I or you was a thing, the Bible was saying that thing. So take it up with God. You'll get a chance on Judgment Day.
Len, there's another. This is from last week. Good to see religion back on its heels, forced here to respond to the atheist experience. Hopefully someday more people will, quote unquote, trust their brains rather than ambiguous interpreted Bronze Age myths. Sad to witness humans with such low regard for themselves, then passing that on to children. Science has proven past, present religious teachings wrong time after time. If you were raised in an other religious culture, you would believe their myths. Strange how that works.
Boy, you crumple paper loud, bro. But anyhow, that is the genetic fallacy to say because I was born in a Christian culture, I am there. That's why I'm a Christian. If that were true, well, he would be a Christian too, wouldn't he? Because
he would be.
Erica?
He would be. Len, you're gonna have to turn off your camera because you are not always coming through.
Okay, let me do something else instead. All right.
While you do that, let me read this feedback from Sean. Tim, I think John is much better to have instead of Len. Certainly brings out the more goodness in you more. I like that one. That's a good one.
It's insightful. Yeah, you should always talk to people that bring out the best in you. If I'm not bringing out the best in anyone, then put me in the garbage, I guess. Get rid of me.
Yes. Another one was, I agree with that comment. Len just brings everything down and attacks like a prideful, arrogant, bad word half the time.
Well, I am an attack dog. Some people have called me a pit bull. I think someone told me that I was your pit bull once and that you needed to tighten the leash on me. Remember that guy?
Yeah, that didn't work out good. Well, whatever you did, now you're crystal clear and your audio is fantastic.
Yeah, I just shut down GarageBand and everything.
Okay. Now you see what I'm doing with my picture, my garbage can now?
I do, yeah.
All right, next.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
More feedback. I don't understand how you think atheists cannot know the truth. Atheists are exactly the same as theists minus one belief. How can this mean that you can know truth, yet I cannot? And that is the beginning of a long conversation that I had with Lee. You can read it on the video. Basically, he's clueless and he needs to. This is the show for you. You need to you keep watching. You'll get it.
Let me just give you the short version of the answer right here. We don't say that atheists don't know anything. We're just saying that you cannot justify your epistemology or your epistemic positions. You have no grounding or basis for epistemology if you deny the God who created you. So that's that. No, so it's a bit of a misrepresentation of our position or a misunderstanding. I don't want to assume the worst of this person.
Oh, of course not.
Or their intentions.
Oh, next, this one is from the Proud Atheist. Nice name. This should be a great series. I say that because when Christians begin to recognize the superior aptitude and intelligence of the AE hosts over those of the BTWN, who so often cannot even articulately comprehend the keen and articulate arguments being put forth by the AE, and can mostly only respond with the usual tripe from the idiotic collection of silly and fanatical writings from ancient centuries when ignorance and illiteracy reigned supreme throughout the world. They will have no conscious choice but to thereafter join the ranks of atheists. Thanks in advance for thank you for advancing reason and critical thinking, however inadvertently. Later, he says he's proud because he has a bumper sticker that says Proud Atheist.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for watching Proud Atheist. I hope that you will continue your viewership and that you will learn things, and we'll do our best to be gracious in our critiques. And, because, look, atheists are not our enemy here. You are our ministry. You are the very person we're trying to reach out to, because we want to see you be saved. We don't want you left in the foolishness and absurdity of atheism. We want you to come to a saving knowledge of the truth, that Jesus Christ is Lord, that he is the creator and the savior. And if you die without faith in him, or if he returns before a time that you have put faith in him and you're still alive, then you are eternally damned. So come to Christ not to save yourself just from hell. Come to Christ because he is worthy. Once you realize the sacrifice made for your sin, you will see just how great a savior Jesus Christ is.
All right. And the last one I will read this week. Look forward to next week reading. Give us some feedback on the YouTube channel or email me at BibleThumpingWingnut@gmail.com. This one is from the Spectrum Atheist. If you're going to argue with people on the atheist experience, then call into the atheist experience rather than comment on their videos where you know they can't respond to what you have to say. Call into the atheist experience or Talk Heathen and make your arguments to them directly.
Well, if anyone has been watching this YouTube channel for any amount of time, you know that we've had Matt Dillahunty on this YouTube channel to have these very discussions. And if you watch the atheist experience at all, you know that people like us don't last long on the phones. Often it's a talking over followed by a hanging up on of any Christian who can articulately refute them. So we don't need to call them. We have a platform. We have their words. We have their video. We don't need them directly. So here we are talking about them.
And none of those comments made it into the garbage can. So those were all bad comments. What I would say why we don't call into the atheist experience is because what would we ask them?
Right.
They don't have any answers.
Right.
Yeah. I've got no question for these folks.
Right. Yeah. Well, it should be a fun and interesting and exciting show. So you want to dig into the content and see what they're chatting about this week?
Yep. This will play it right from the beginning, and then perhaps, depending on how it goes, we'll skip forward and look for calls.
Okay.
Hello, and welcome to the Atheist Experience. Today is March 4th, 2018, and I'm your host, Tracie Harris. With me today is trans activist and host of the Atheist Manifesto and the Queer Side podcast, Callie Wright.
Hi, thanks for having me. Super exciting.
Huge audience turnout for you today.
Very exciting.
Yeah, we had trouble finding parking. It was wild. The Atheist Experience is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, a Texas nonprofit educational organization dedicated to promoting separation of church and state and positive atheist culture. I have one special announcement today. There is a fundraiser going on at goaxp.org. I have a link at the blog for the open show thread on today's show. Just let people know we are sending 10 hosts and crew of the Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen live call-in shows to the American Atheist Convention in Oklahoma City.
I always like
We'll be
their
broadcasting
announcements.
live from the main stage on Friday, March
Yeah,
30th.
it's very
from 12
professionally
to 2 p.m.
produced.
Central. To help make this possible, we're asking for your help to cover expenses for the
Atheist Manifesto, Tim. You're going to go to iTunes and subscribe to that?
Probably not.
I might have to check it out. Because I've always been told there is no homosexual agenda.
Mhm.
you. We
Why would there
were
be a
very, very
manifesto?
sad to have to reschedule for the Godless Bitches podcast.
Right.
on-
Yeah. I just need to learn to read my emails.
No, it's
the
totally
problem.
okay. I mean, it happens, but we definitely would love to have you on there as well.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about yourself, about what you do.
This must be a well-known guy around the atheist community.
Must be. Can't we just turn down the volume over them instead of like
They're gonna,
pausing?
well, they're gonna. He's gonna. Well,
Yeah,
I'll try
I'm
to produce
a
the show
trans woman,
better.
trans
Sorry.
activist. I do a show called The Atheist Manifesto with my co-host Ari. We're both queer trans folks, and we're both atheists. And so we talk about the intersection of those things, and how those things inform the ways the ways that we navigate the world. And I also do a podcast called The Queer Side, which is more of a storytelling show along the lines of like Snap Judgment, This American Life, that kind of stuff, where it's not really necessarily related to religion or atheism or anything like that. It's just kind of find somebody with an amazing, interesting, tragic, funny story to tell and give them a platform to tell their story. So so that's the short version of what we do.
Yeah, and so the overlap, I think, with secularism.
You've got some funny stories. Maybe he'll want you to come on there.
Don't assume the pronoun, dude.
Religious communities of different types. Obviously, there are some people
Respect the
within religion that are very accepting and open, but there are many people who are not. And a lot of times the religious intrusion into the state comes in the form of legislation that makes life difficult for people, sometimes infringes on people's rights, and you deal with some of that as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I like to say is that secular activism is kind of LGBT activism by proxy, because really the only argument that you ever hear with legislation that's meant to restrict marriage equality, that's meant to restrict, that's meant to, like anti-discrimination laws and that kind of stuff, the argument is always, this is what God says, therefore, and if we remove that as a valid argument and say like, well, it doesn't matter what God says because that's not how our laws are supposed to be written, that's not how our society is supposed to be organized, then you're kind of automatically building a wall that protects LGBT people by making those arguments by proxy.
Len Pettis.
All right. Well, the whole idea of religious intrusion by legislation, I wonder how many drug dealers feel intruded on because of the legislation against them. I wonder how many prostitutes feel religious intrusion because they're not allowed to be prostitutes legally. They can't go and sell their bodies openly on the market, things like that. And then the argument, they're upset. The argument, this is what God says, therefore, look, it's just as valid as this should be legal because I say so, therefore make it legal. Again, the question of morality is, what makes your morality greater than mine? Well, it's for the greater good. It's for some kind of ultimate happiness. Look, the purpose of marriage outside of the scripture, let's say, let's just look at it from a purely evolutionary standpoint. Not that I would affirm an evolutionary standpoint in terms of Darwinism, but let's just assume their position here. Homosexuals are an aberration evolutionarily, and can only harm the species. You know, if everybody was homosexual, the species would not be propagated. So from an evolutionary standpoint, we can say that evolution says you're an aberration, therefore homosexual gay marriage should not be legal. It's just as valid. Now prove me wrong. You can't just say you can't just make an argument and assume that your position is superior. You have to justify the superiority of your position in order to have a valid argument. So that's all I got to say about that.
Good stuff. Let me get over here. Press play.
So that's where a lot of the overlap comes. And the other overlap, honestly, is that, I was an atheist from like 16 or 17. And my journey was very much like, I read the Bible, didn't make a lot of sense, so I'm an atheist. I don't really have a story so much. But when I started going to cons and talking to people and finding out that there's a lot of overlap in coming out as an atheist and coming out as queer or trans, like they're not exactly the same thing, but people lose family, people lose jobs, people lose their social circles. And so I think there's a sort of special level of empathy that can be had between folks coming out as atheist or secular. And
what if her partner came out as a born-again Christian? Would there be any ostracization from this individual? What if that person his or her partner, their partner, Zer's partner here, came out and said, I'm a born-again Christian and I can, I love you, but we can't continue this relationship because it is against my belief system, but I still want to be friends. How long would that last in her paradigm? Let's not pretend that ostracization comes only from one side of the plate here.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. Are you really going to call him a girl the whole time?
Zer, her, ver, burger, whatever.
Folks coming out as queer or trans. So there are lots of ways in which those things intersect, and that's kind of where we sit on the show and where the conversations are that we tend to have.
Green screen has a
we talked,
negative
I think, a
effect
little bit
often.
about,
You notice that?
Like yesterday, we were able to have some conversations, and one of the issues that we discussed was sort of the overall very conservative Christian model of relationships, family, gender, how things are very simplistic, very binary, man, woman, family, children, nuclear.
Right.
Only option. And just about anything that deviates from that, right? So if somebody doesn't want to have children, there's a problem there. Got to restrict birth control, got to restrict abortion access. If somebody wants to have a gay relationship, that's a problem because it's not the man and woman. It's not what God intended. It's just any group that sort of bucks that Christian religious model is automatically on the outs.
Yeah, well, and some of us can't win because I thought about this in conversation with a family member who's a very, very conservative Pentecostal, and I thought, so there are a couple of relationship models that I could end up in, and some of them she would accept for bad reasons, and some of them she would reject for bad reasons. So, for example, I, as a trans woman, if I ended up in a relationship with a man, she wouldn't accept that because in her mind that's a gay relationship.
Right.
If I end up in a relationship with another woman, a cisgender woman, she would accept that, but she accepts it because she doesn't see me as who I am. Right. So it's acceptance, but for a really messed up reason.
Right.
And so it builds this, like you said, these models where like if you don't fit this very, very strict set of guidelines, then you're wrong. And
so the obvious question, Len, is why do they draw the line where they draw the line?
Because it fits their paradigm.
Right. I mean, what would Tracie think if Callie chose to have a relationship with a 10-year-old boy or a 14-year-old boy
or an animal?
Yeah. Would that be acceptable? And why do you draw the line there?
It gets right back down to the question of ultimate authorities and by what standard? What standard makes your paradigm the right one? It's a completely arbitrary because it makes me happy. Murdering puppies with hammers makes me happy. Should I be therefore allowed to murder puppies with hammers? I mean, come on. let's be adults about the conversation here. You know, in terms of what fits the paradigm, it's just a completely subjective standard based on individual happiness. You wouldn't run your house that way, you know. Well, I just want my kids to be happy, so they just get to eat chocolate and peanut butter all day long or something. I guess my kids like Reese's Pieces. I don't know. But, you know, and she was talking about like, oh, there's this strict box you have to fit in where you get married and you have children and you have to be this certain kind of way. And it's like, again, evolutionarily, that is how the species moves forward. So let's take the Bible out of the conversation for a minute here. You know, from an evolutionary standpoint, that only makes sense. And if you want to have sex without having children, you can do that very easily. A woman only is fertile 5 days out of the month when she's ovulating. So you can get around those things even without any form of birth control, for example. So, yeah, I mean, all of these ridiculously simplistic, two-dimensional, and in some cases straw man arguments just hold no water when you examine them under the light of scrutiny. But you notice this show doesn't put itself up against scrutiny really ever.
Right. And remember our feedback from last week, the extraordinary intelligence of the hosts over there compared to
extraordinary.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. Behold.
Mm-hmm.
Behold, the host of the Atheist Manifesto and the queer side. Behold the intelligence. Listen, he's not whatever. I'm not even sure. She identified here, whoever they are, they identified themselves as whatever they are. I think it's a man, but
while you're thinking of what you said, let me read a comment from our live feed. This is a great what you guys are doing. BTWN, big support of you guys. This just strengthens my presuppositional apologetics every time I watch it. Continue to keep pressing on. God bless in Jesus Christ. Thank you, Stephen. Did you remember what you're going to say?
I didn't. I'm sorry, but
that's okay. I get lost in your words sometimes too.
It does happen.
You can't be valid.
And I think the thing that really is the problem here is that, you know, certainly they're capable of holding a perspective that it's wrong. They're capable of holding whatever perspective they want. But I think the issue is when they start to legislate that only what they accept as acceptable
again
is what's going to
again. Do they want to make sex with children legal?
Yeah. By what standard?
Yeah.
Legally allowable.
Yeah. And I've heard people say things that I can at least have a certain level of respect for. Well, they'll say, you know, this is my morality. This is what I believe is correct morality. But I understand that what my morality is doesn't necessarily get to dictate what the laws are. And, you know, it's a different conversation at that point.
All law is dictated by morality. Every single law on the book, when you say you can't legislate morality, what law doesn't have something to do with morality?
Yeah. Yeah.
I can have at least a certain level of respect for that point of view, as opposed to, well, this is what I think is right, therefore nobody else is allowed to do anything else.
Right, because I think all of us are going to have disagreements with regard to what might be best or what might be correct or what might be appropriate behavior to have toward other people. But that doesn't mean that we're immediately going to run out and pass laws,
right,
abolishing or banning everything that we don't agree with.
Yeah, well, and that's so much of the argument you hear is that the folks on the left are authoritarians on this kind of issue, and I'm like, well, that just demonstrates to me that you don't understand my position, because my position is, if there is consent and honesty involved, I don't care what you do. You know, if you want to have a relationship with 10.
Why is that the standard? Why is consent needed?
And honesty.
Yeah.
Consent and honesty. Why? What obligates one bag of stardust and protoplasm dancing to its DNA? What obligates that to be honest to another protoplasmic bag of DNA?
Someday, we're going to review this Raw Men episode 81, Women versus Religion. And we're going to point out how this fine zoologist and Aaron Raw, how they, how would I make that shot? Yeah, this fine woman here equates reproduction and evolution, and it's very interesting. Look what happened to my atheist experience now when it went away.
What have you done?
What have I done?
They are. There they are.
There they are. We missed you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have some really good stuff from the Raw Men show. We'll get to that maybe later today or maybe next week.
15 people of all genders, and you don't want to have kids, you do want to have, like, I don't care. As long as everybody is informed, there's honesty and consent. I don't care. Like, I don't know that there could be a less authoritarian position than that.
Right. Like, there's not a big uprising in the trans community to pass.
Yeah, it's one big happy orgy. Just consent.
Happy. From using a particular bathroom.
Right. And we're not trying to force people onto hormones or anything like that. It's like, I just want to be able to access this stuff.
Yeah. No one's trying to dictate to me from the...
Sorry. Len, you've got a question?
That is a load of bullcrap. First of all, there are plenty within the LGBT community who are saying that if a 6-year-old identifies as a gender opposite of the one that they were born with, that is the time to start hormone replacement therapy. And there have been some that have said that 6 years old is not too young to transition surgically. So that's a load of crap. And there was a story about a 14 or a 15-year-old who was taken away from her parents because they refused to give hormone replacement therapy, and now is now in the custody of the grandparents. So don't tell me, my drill sergeant used to say, don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining.
We don't use that kind of language here, Len.
Sorry, that's crude.
This is Christian programming.
Sorry. I'm used to being on a secular podcast. but nonetheless here, to say that we're not trying to, I can't remember how she worded it, but essentially she said we're not trying to, she just wants things for herself, not necessarily trying to force or whatever she said there. That is a load of garbage. It's a lie. And being part of the Atheist Manifesto ought to know better. I bet if we listened to that podcast and gave it a review, and we could probably find where this individual has said as much. For example, from that person's standard, why would you deny a 6-year-old hormone replacement therapy if they want to transition?
They have consent.
If they have consent and they're honest, why would they?
Yeah.
Community, my gender.
Right.
So I don't know why this is so hard for them to simply accept that,
Well, because you're the right one. You're the right identity.
But I guess I look at it like they can choose to live and to view this however they want to, and nobody's forcing it onto them. But they see just the fact of other people's existence, of the existence of atheists, of gay people, of trans people, of all kinds of things. I mean, in the past, it would have been interracial, right? It would have been the issue, and so it's just this idea of you don't fit the model. And I think part of the problem is, I mean, there was an article recently where they wanted to pass some regulation on not validating trans people. We talked about it a little bit on GB yesterday.
Yeah.
And it was very weird. They literally inserted God into the dialogue. So this is legislators basically saying we're doing this because God. And one of the things that was just, all of it was disturbing, I guess. But yeah, I just found it so unbelievable the way that this matters to them to that degree.
And the thing that kind of blew my mind about it is if I'm remembering the story correctly, they weren't actually passing any laws or anything. It was just a resolution saying, like, we as a legislative body are making this statement about our morality. Yeah. Like, it wasn't even actually a law. So it was, they took time and taxpayer money to just say, like, well, this is where our moral values stand.
Yeah, like, they were in opposition to things that they felt, I guess, validated.
Yeah,
the trans perspectives, or we're accepting policies that were accepting of that they were against. Right. And one of the issue to me in that case is that what they're literally saying that they have this model. One of the things that they are opposed to is, for example, the sex assignment surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And what's mind-blowing is I read an article where somebody was talking about that, and they were saying, oh, I don't know about, the ethics of this is still debated, was part of the statement that they were using. Like the ethics is still debated within the medical community. And I thought, and yet, where were you when children were being sexually assaulted?
Len.
Okay, so the reason we're opposed to sex assignment surgery, particularly for children, is that children tend to go through phases. And so sexual reassignment surgery almost never cures any form of depression that a trans person claims to have because of their dysmorphia, because of their mental disorder. It's what they have. This individual on the left is mentally ill.
Yes.
Okay, we cater to the mentally ill. We help them. We help them. And one of the greatest things you can do to help somebody is to give them the truth. Now, sex reassignment surgery often makes things like there's an outrageously high number of trans people who have transitioned surgically and still commit suicide. Regret it. A vast majority regret it 5 years later. And those who waited and don't do it are often glad that they didn't. So statistics, and not that we're arguing from statistics here, I'm just saying what they're saying right now is factually the opposite of what people need to know the truth is.
Addressing a comment on the live feed, Evans, I'm gonna approve your comment. They say sex with a child hurts people, and I'll repeat what I said last week. We have documentation of adults who happen to be atheists, who are promoting the idea that adults can have sexual contact with children, even babies. We've seen videos on it. I've seen documentations presented by YouTubers of adults saying that when they were a child, they were touched sexually by an adult, and they claim that they're better off for it. So,
yeah, Milo Yiannopoulos got in huge hot water for saying that on Joe Rogan's podcast. In fact, he said when he was 13, when being diddled by a priest, that he was the predator, not the priest.
I didn't know that.
So there's your honesty and consent right there. What's the problem?
Yeah.
And they can't even consent. And we were doing this, and there were very few voices, opposing this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was routine for a doctor to just, here's an intersex child, indeterminate sex. You're just.
Yes, Len.
Okay, so we kind of paused in the middle of her transition, but she's talking about the pedophile priest, and where was the opposition? It was in the Protestant church. It was in the true church, the true bride of Christ, not what Protestants have historically always called the Antichrist, the Roman Catholic Church. So you were looking in the wrong places.
And I don't know how much we should interact with the live comments, but no, we didn't say that Milo was an atheist. I was talking about one person. Len was talking about a different person.
Choosing a gender, you're applying it to this child without any consent. And then later in life, we found that these children had all kinds of problems.
Yeah, well, and if you look at all of the data that's available, and it's not as well studied as some subjects are, but there is plenty of data out there. And if memory serves, the number of people who end up regretting taking steps to transition is like 2 or 3%. And usually it has more to do.
That didn't come through, Len.
False.
The data has come out, Callie, and the science tells us you are a male. The data is conclusive.
Yes, if this individual was to murder somebody and there was DNA left at the crime scene, there would be a gender that they would be looking for. So, yeah.
Fact that medical science isn't quite advanced enough to get people to the level that they want to get to, or that they take steps to transition. Usually trans women begin to be seen as women by society and understand what a tough road that is in some ways. There was a reporter that, if memory served, worked for ESPN and just tried to do her job as a woman post-transition and found that the environment was so hostile that she transitioned back and eventually ended up committing suicide. It's a really, really sad story, but it had nothing to do with the fact of her not actually being who she was. It was that the world made things so difficult for her. She had to make the calculation of, is it more worth it to take the abuse I get for being myself, or to just going back to pretending to being someone I'm not? And that's the position that a lot of folks are forced into. And whenever anybody talks about,
2 weeks ago when you were here, you said I stopped it too much.
I know, but there's so much here, dude. There's just so much material. Okay, so this person committed suicide because of the way society treated them. That's because this person needed help. It's not society's fault, okay? It is not society's fault that they didn't see a man dressed up like a woman and transitioning to a woman as a woman. I'm sorry, that is just not society's fault. That is the mental illness not being treated. She was sick and she was untreated. She was like a cancer patient who needed chemo, but was like, no, I'm not going to do chemo. I'm not going to do radiation. I'm going to do this other thing instead. People just need to accept my cancer. No, that's not how we treat people. It's like Karen Carpenter, a famous singer in the 70s who had a similar dysmorphia that manifested in anorexia, had a body dysmorphia. We don't look at Karen Carpenter when she tells us she's fat and agree with her. We make her a sandwich. We give her help. That's what these people need. They need help. It's so hateful to leave these people in the state that they're in, that these are people who need our prayers. They need our pity. They need the truth. They need the gospel. They need our help. We don't just we turn them over to Satan because they're dirty homo, trans, whatever. We don't do that. We share the truth with them in love. We make the anorexic a sandwich. That's all I'm saying.
And somebody just dropped $100 into their chat. Did you know, folks, that you can give right here on the Bible Thumping Wingnut live Google Hangout? There is Super Chat. If you don't know what Super Chat is, I set this up a few weeks ago. I never told anybody, but there's a button right next to where you can chat. It's got a $sign, and you can donate to the Bible Thumping Wingnut right there in the live chat. Just like somebody just gave $5 to the Atheist Experience. They got more money than they know what to do with, Len.
I know. Hey, can you replay this at like 1.5x, or are we not allowed to speed it up when it's live?
I did. It was 1.25.
Oh, okay. I'll speed it up a little more.
The high prevalence of depression or anxiety, for example, in the trans community, or the prevalence of attempted suicide. People point back to this and say, well, that's because inherently that these things are wrong. That you being trans, it's creating such a cognitive dissonance in your head that you can't stand it.
In my mind, what if we apply these same arguments to gun rights? Right? So, for example, I bring a gun into my home and my children get a hold of it and accidentally one of them gets shot. And I say, I regret I ever brought that gun into my house. And somebody says, well, then we should ban guns. Right? Nobody should be able to own a gun because you had this incident that made you regret bringing a gun into the house. That's not how it works. I mean, no matter where you stand on gun rights, that's an awful argument.
Right. It's just a terrible argument. Even if you end up on the right side of the argument from whatever perspective, it's just bad.
Yeah. Nobody should think that that's a good argument to make.
Len.
That's because it's not a good argument. It's not an apples to apples comparison. You're comparing apples to the universe at this point when you make these kind of statements. That if you, is logic this woman's enemy or something that she can't form a logical argument? All right, carry on.
Tracie's the one they all look up to.
I know, she's the beast mode one.
Beast mode.
Not impressed.
And the other one that you were just describing, what was about? I'm not sure I remember. The regret was one, but then you brought up another point, and it reminded me of. I was like, there could be a parallel gun argument there. I don't know, a parallel bad gun, gun ownership argument. But yeah, these are.
Question.
I just wanted to say something else too, and she reminded me of it. Is that suicide happens, or In what other instances does someone commit suicide where we blame circumstances outside of themselves? You know what I mean? Like, okay, since we're making comparisons, let's just talk about Columbine. These guys were mercilessly bullied, right? So can we say that it was their society that drove them to be school shooters and caused them to kill all those kids and then themselves to kill, what was it, 19 people? Do we say that, or do we say, no, there was something not clicking inside of them? They needed help. And certainly, I'm not justifying bullying or saying that bullying isn't wrong and that it had no factor in it. But these guys had something not clicking right upstairs that needed to be addressed at a very deep level. Okay. So that would be what I have to say about that.
That's all I have to say about that. All right. We're skipping forward to the moment when they take their first caller. You comfortable with that? I hope so.
Yes, I'm happy.
All right.
Is that like because we're in the center?
Well, it's not written for. Well, yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about Noah's Ark.
Okay.
I wanted to start with something in Genesis 6:3 here. It says that after the flood, no man will live past 120 years, which is very amazing, since no man after the flood has lived to be 120 years. The oldest man that ever lived was a Japanese man who lived to be 100.
And how do we know that anybody? How do we know that anybody ever lived past 120 years?
And why does specifically what the Bible have to say about that? What is that?
I mean, if I wrote a book and said no one is ever going to be 15 feet tall after this time, and I claimed that there used to be people that were 15 feet tall, would you say, like, wow, how did they know that there wouldn't be any 15-foot tall people 2,000 years later?
Yeah, but I just think it's amazing with all the scientific discoveries that no man has lived to be over 120. But there was a woman that lived to be 122 in France, but
that's a woman
in Genesis.
And they matter less, as we know.
It doesn't say man.
Right, but I'm not convinced that people were living as long as the Bible claims before that was written.
Yeah, I think you would have to demonstrate.
I think that the idea is that you have a
first.
myth that basically is claiming that people live to be, 900 years old or whatever, 500 years old. And then they said, oh, but this doesn't happen anymore. And it's like, I'm claiming that it never did happen.
Yeah,
that we have no evidence that it happened.
Well, I wanted to start with just a little bit of evidence about the oceans.
Okay.
The Pacific Ocean is really huge. It's huge. It's 165 million square kilometers. So all the continents of the Earth could fit inside the Pacific Ocean. And when you're looking at the average land elevation of the world, it's around 2,756 feet. So that's about half a mile. And when you just look at the depth of the Pacific Ocean, the average depth is about 14,000 feet, and the max depth is Mariner's Trench is about 5 miles deep. So because that's the question atheists always ask. They go, where did the water go? Well, it went into the ocean.
I'm not sure that's a discussion that I've heard a lot.
Well, I don't even ask it because I don't believe there ever was a global flood. So I'm not asking where did the water go. I'm saying just prove that there was actually a global flood. Or even if there was a global flood, prove that the stories that are in the Bible about it are correct. Prove that it happened because of a 40-day and night rain. Prove that, you know what I mean? I don't understand the relevancy. Like, even if we had a global flood at some point, which, it is funny because if the entire Earth was covered with water, I do understand the question of, like, how come it's not still covered with water? But the point is, so what? So let's say that we look at the science and there was a global flood, and later on we had these myths that talked about it, just like people along river areas write about their floods. So they wrote these myths about a flood, and so what?
Well, it's the Hebrew word is mabu, and that means it was a global flood, because there's a lot of creationists.
Okay, I'm just saying, let's say that despite the fact that we could get into an argument about whether or not there was a global flood, let's just say, for the sake of your argument, that there was a global flood, and that somehow the water then redistributed into the oceans, and that there was the Hebrews who wrote down some myths about this. So what?
Well, if you're a Christian, you got to prove Genesis first. So,
all right, Len.
This is why we promote presuppositional apologetics. Not that the arguments that he's making are particularly terrible, but he should be pushing her that don't say there's no evidence, because there is evidence and she's simply rejecting it. Show me the evidence of a flood and 40-day water, 40-day rainfall, and all these other things. You have evidence and you reject it. So be honest about what your position is. Don't say there is no evidence, because you have to reject any evidence before the copy machine. Otherwise, there are written firsthand, well, I can't say firsthand, but there are written accounts of these things having happened. And with the flood particularly, I mean, it's something that appears in the mythology of cultures worldwide. Why is that? And why do they all date to around the same time? You have to ask yourself those questions. However, the greater point here is this is why we are presuppositionalists, because when you get into trading evidence and give me evidence for this, look, you can pile up evidence and you can build a really strong case and even win the argument, but you're not going to convince these two God haters of anything. So you have to get down to presuppositionally, when you're talking about evidence, what evidence presupposes truth. What is your standard for truth? What is truth in your worldview? That's what we need to get down to here. So, this call is a perfect reason. Not that this person is doing a particularly terrible job. Evidentially, they're not doing that great of a job. These are arguments that do really well in undergirding the faith of a Christian who already believes the Bible. But in terms of arguing with atheists, these arguments are pretty much falling on deaf ears, as we see here.
Those two people on the show, they don't lack enough evidence. Their problem is not that they don't know the truth.
Right.
The problem is they suppress it. So they've already been presented the evidence. They know that there is a God, and they know that they will be judged. It's interesting that Romans chapter 1, I say this probably every week, as it talks about people who suppress the truth in their unrighteousness about who God is, at the same time they embrace people who are homosexual or all types of deviant sexual behavior. And it's a interesting piece of evidence that they do that. So presenting evidence is not the problem. I would never call the Atheist Experience show to present evidence, because they don't need evidence. They already have it.
That's right.
Proving Noah's Ark is pretty difficult, but I'm trying. So.
Well, I don't necessarily think that that's true, because I have a lot of Christian friends who don't take Genesis literally, and
Sure.
they call it parables, and so I'm not sure that I accept your premise that you have to prove Genesis.
Yeah, you absolutely don't. Yeah. But if you want to go that route, it's not relevant to whether or not there's a God. But I mean, even if events occurred, it doesn't mean that a God was driving it.
Well, I disagree with that. So
what's your evidence?
I don't know.
That's what because you give a lot of statistics.
Well, the record for the most amount of rainfall in 1 minute is in Maryland in July 4th, 1956. It rained 1.22 inches in 1 minute.
Let me try this again.
No,
Let's assume, for the sake of your argument, that there was historically a global flood, and that later some people wrote some myths about it. So what?
I don't have the artifact right in front of me, but I believe it's called the Weld-Blondel prism. They found this prism, and it has basically a bunch of Sumerian kings, and it has basically, after the flood, all their ages dropped dramatically.
You lost me on the relevance, because again, what Tracie asked is, okay, we accept for the purposes of this discussion, we accept that a global flood happened. Our question is, okay, so what? Let's assume there was a global flood. How do you prove that a God caused that?
Well, who else would cause a global flood?
That's not answering the question, though.
No. Yeah, where is the evidence that a God would be behind such a thing?
Especially because we know on natural disasters on a smaller scale than a global flood, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, all that, we understand decently well the natural mechanisms for those. So why would we not assume that there was a natural mechanism for that? Why would we jump to, well, this is special enough that it had to have been a God? It couldn't just be the natural mechanism.
Yeah, is every flood caused by a God? Are regional floods caused by lesser gods?
Yes. 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 Everything that comes to be is because of God. So, I hope he answers that way. Let's find out.
Well, he said that, what did he say?
He was talking about some crystal, and then then they asked, well, what is the evidence? And he basically was like, well, what else would it be?
Oh, he said we have understood the natural processes that cause these things. Really? Does science explain how things happen naturally? They have nowhere to start to explain where matter came from.
Right.
They have no explanation for that. What is that natural mechanism that caused life to come from non-life?
Right. And again, this conversation should highlight why you should embrace a presuppositional approach. And notice that now that he's being pressed, he's going way outside of the scriptures. Way outside of the scriptures.
Well, I believe God is sovereign. So to answer your question, yes.
Okay, so then the real question isn't really about whether or not a flood occurred. Like, let's just say that there's a flood in Tennessee, and you're saying that God is behind that flood. We can just talk about that flood. What makes you think there's a God behind that flood?
I guess that's an interesting question, but for a global flood to occur, you'd have to believe it's some kind of supernatural.
No, you wouldn't.
No, you don't at all.
No, you wouldn't.
No, not at all.
I would have an event. Wait a minute. I would just have an event that was like a global flood where the water redistributed into these other areas that became the oceans. And even if it was counterintuitive to scientific models, the answer to that would be, wow, that's a really weird incident that we currently can't explain. We don't know what caused it. You're saying that you do accept that a God is the cause of that. And I'm asking you where you're getting that.
Well,
as opposed to you don't know.
Job,
sorry.
Well, if you look at the book of Job, that is, according to most creation scientists, the oldest book in the Bible. And it says that...
Len.
Okay, so he should be somewhere like, Colossians 1:16, 15, 16-ish. He, Jesus Christ, Paul is speaking of here, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. That's where this argument needs to be taking place, in my opinion, with this individual who, hey, God bless him for trying, but there's no gospel in his argumentation. He's kind of arguing evidence for evidence's sake, right? So I just wish he would get right to the heart of the matter, which is the gospel and the scripture. And you could bring these arguments to these two women and they would have the same snide, laughing remarks and everything, but that doesn't matter. Okay, we're not in charge of the results here. We're called to be heralds and stewards of the truth, and to handle God's word and to answer objections with fear and trembling and meekness and respect. And you know what? We're not in charge of the results. God is going to save. When he said, hey, I believe in a sovereign God. Hey, good answer. Good answer. Now tell me about this sovereign God. Right. Tell me about tell me about how he divinely holds all things together by the word of his power, and how he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross so that sinners can be reconciled back to him. Tell of that and let them laugh at that.
Mm-hmm. All right, we are done with that caller. We are now going to the next caller. Moving right along.
I have, I'll try to make it quick. I was a Seventh-day Adventist I'm 17 years old, so I just, like a week ago, kind of told my parents and everything that I'm an atheist, and they're both very religious people. They're both Seventh-day Adventists. I don't know if you guys know about that religion.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it's they're not like some, I guess, radical Baptists in a way. They don't march up and down the street, with anti-gay signs and stuff like that. But they are, I don't know, I guess they're kind of different. So I was having a conversation with, I don't want to name them or anything.
That's fine.
But I was having a conversation with a Seventh-day Adventist, and he was talking about how the dating system, about dating dinosaur bones and stuff, is incorrect, and how scientists, the dating system they do or whatever is not right, and they can't actually, say that, oh, this is millions of years old, so that proves that the Earth is this old and all of that stuff, and that since they can't do that, or since that he doesn't accept that idea, then he says that leaves room for the God theory, as he said. It leaves room for this other theory. And so I was like, okay, but that still doesn't prove that God exists. So I was wondering, like, what?
Welcome to our last call. Right. Wow. I'm sorry. I talked over you during that last sentence because it's just so appropriate based on the last call we had. But what was your summary there?
It was just kind of like, what do I say to someone who just doesn't accept that what the testing methods are is incorrect?
Well, sometimes it's tough, but sometimes you have to accept the fact that regardless of what you say, you're not going to change someone's mind because they have such an emotional investment in the position that they're in, right? I feel like I'm less emotionally invested in my position of atheism because, at the end of the day, like when I die, it's over with. So like, I feel like there would be more motivation for me to stick with a religion if I was a religious person. I'm not necessarily emotionally attached to being atheist. It's just kind of what I figured out I think is true about the world. So at some level, you have to accept the fact that a lot of times, no matter what your best argument is, you're not going to change somebody's mind, and accept that sometimes that's the position that you're going to get to. And aside from that, honestly, I think just do as much reading as you can, learn as much about it as you can. So, because a lot of times I think
I agree with this person, and I think that this is a mistake that we make as Christians often, whether we're presuppositional or evidential, is recognizing that the results are in God's hands and arguing beyond what we should. And I've certainly been guilty of this myself. We have to leave things in the hands of God. At some point, we're just not going to convince some people. So I agree with that. But in terms of this individual, and
it's not our job to convince people anyway. It's our job to present the truth.
Exactly. Present the truth. Present the best arguments that you have. And look, for some of these callers, they are presenting the best arguments they have. They haven't studied presuppositionalism. They've never heard of Saitem Bruggencate or Cornelius Van Til or Gordon Clark or James White or anybody.
Len Pettis. They've never heard of Len Pettis.
Right. Until now. But I guess my greater point here is that, again, instead of arguing scientific evidence, argue the God of science. Argue why, argue the problem of induction and ask them to reconcile that. Okay. Why does water boil at 212 degrees every single time at sea level? Anyways, why does water always boil at 212 degrees? Oh, because it did in the past. Well, great. I've never died in the past, so I'm going to live forever. That's not how it works. You have to justify why science and by proxy mathematics is a reliable discipline. So forget carbon dating. I'm not going to, contact Jason Lyle. You want that information. He's much smarter than I am, but if you want to talk about science, refuting atheism, just talk about the God of science and challenge the atheists as to why they think they can trust science. On what basis can you trust science? Oh, I know you can't. You have no basis for trusting science.
People make the mistake of automatically assuming that the person they're speaking with is uninformed. And you can demonstrate, even if you don't get the other person to believe you, they can come away with the conversation like, wow, that person really knew what they were talking about. And maybe that gives me something to think about. And so I think that's an important place to start.
Here's a good thing, though, just to let you know, there's a website called talkorigins.org. And it's very important to do the .org or you'll end up somewhere not safe for work. So talkorigins.org basically responds to questions like the ones we've been addressing with the other callers, right? Like flat Earth and Noah's Ark and the global flood. And that deals specifically with the scientific rebuttals, right? So people that want to go there and want to do the science, I'm going to sit and argue science with you. To me, if you want to argue about the science of it, you should go find a scientist to argue with and then come to us, once you've changed the mind of scientists. But for you, if you actually, like what Callie is saying, someone comes to you and says these dating methods are not okay, and you're like, wow, is that true? The best thing you can do is go look it up and say, wow, is that true? And go and check a site like Talk Origins where they're going to talk about, what is the scientific support for the dating.
If you've seen How to Answer the Fool, and if you've heard Saitan Bruggencate in interviews, he talks about the problem with arguing evidence. And here you see it with the woman on the right. You argue evidence and it's like, oh, wow, that person sounds really smart. I'm going to go home and research it further. And because you haven't talked about the God behind the science, you have them going to look up arguments to refute your argument instead of leaving them at the gospel that you have no basis for the reliability of any scientific method as an atheist. Let me tell you about Jesus Christ, who in him we live and move and have our being. And leave people with that, not going to Google, carbon dating methods.
Yep. Good point. I agree. Next caller. We're skipping ahead again.
Ben in Los Angeles, California. Thank you for your patience. You're on with Tracie and Callie.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you for waiting.
All right. Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here. So I've watched the show for a long time now, and something, Tracie, that seems to come up over and over again is someone will start talking about the soul and or spirituality. You'll ask them to define it, and you'll have a long conversation, and eventually they'll say something like, God is love, or the soul is just is, right? So I thought about that for a long time, and full disclosure, I'm an atheist. But I thought about that for a long time and wanted to come up with a definition of a soul and spirituality for you that hopefully you can understand and feel satisfied with. But I doubt anyone.
I guess my question. Let me ask. I was going to say, let me ask a question first, because before we get going, I could define a soul as like this, as Muhammad here. And I could say, okay, there's the soul. But if this isn't what other people are trying to communicate, it wouldn't be useful to me.
I think it is what people are trying to communicate.
How would he know that? Because they're not here to agree or disagree. But please go ahead. Let me go ahead and let you do your definition.
She won't even let him present an argument because she doesn't know if other people would agree with him.
Did she call the cow Muhammad?
Yeah.
That's actually very that's very funny. But okay, yeah. She wouldn't even let the poor guy get off the ground, and he's an atheist. So
he is?
Yeah, he said, full disclosure, I'm an atheist.
Oh,
so
I missed it.
You were stuck on Muhammad.
Yeah, so
well, that makes sense why she said what she said now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so this is a hard thing to do, is say, I don't think that this is going to be a definition that somebody who believes in a soul would say is correct, but I think it does capture what they are feeling.
All right. So you're kind of giving your interpretation of what might really be going on with what they're struggling to describe.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have an atheist telling two atheists.
Basically, it started with, I studied computer
soul.
science, and something I found really interesting studying that was that the fundamentals of all computers, how they all work, is just 3 pieces of logic that I'm not going to go very deep into, just to say that you have this logical conception of and, or, and not. And between those 3 logical concepts, that's how you can build the fundamental hardware of all computers.
Okay.
And so it made me think about, what's the analog in humans? Do we have
How interested are you in this conversation, Len?
Kind of interested, because the soul is an important.
Because I want to.
If they're pure physicalists and naturalists, there is absolutely no justification for life. Period. Nothing should be alive.
Yeah.
There's no, and certainly if there's no soul, I mean, everything just drops down another notch, another level. Being a pure physicalist / naturalist, there are massive inconsistencies with a worldview that will only affirm the physical. For example, why are you even talking about logic? Why are you can't even have a discussion of the metaphysical and be rational and consistent. But we can move past it. Let me just say this, that the Christian definition of the soul is simply that which animates the material, the material of the body. And of course, we believe that it's eternal. We're not conditionalists or annihilationists here. So, for example, you put a frog in a blender and you have all of the ingredients necessary for life. Yet, why is it not alive? All the ingredients are there for life. Do I just need to put a whole bunch of electricity to it and hope that life springs out of that again? No. The frog's not alive because its soul is no longer part of the material. So, stop. So, anyhow, we can move past this if you want to. It may not be as interesting as I'm thinking it might be.
I'm a little afraid of what you just said.
Why?
Frogs have souls?
No, I'm just saying there's something that animates life. I'm not saying it's a nefesh that has equal value to that of the human soul. But anything that's alive has something animating it. I'm not saying that there's equal value, for example. And we've talked about the verse in Ecclesiastes that talks about the soul of everything returning back to its creator. Now, we had a conversation with J.D. Hall about that, or you did on the podcast when I was on my break. And he would probably disagree with my conclusions on that. But my opinion is everything that has life has a soul. It's the soul that gives life to any material. Anything material that's alive has a soul. I'm not saying that therefore gives it equal value, just to be clear.
All righty, let's see how this I'm looking forward to addressing some of the comments that are going on over there, but you've got us in this now.
Sort of similar logical conception, and I came to the conclusion that the base level could not be logical because logic came much later in the evolutionary process. So I was thinking about, okay, well, what's the irreducible fundamental part of our experience? And philosophically, you get to qualia, which is notoriously hard to define beyond the stuff of our experience, right? So basically, the idea here is that you have just basically one type of thing that's the fundamental unit of qualia for humans. And I'm just going to call it feelings, and that's going to encompass external sensory information. For example, if you touch something, like if you touch the desk in front of you, you're feeling it with your hands, right? But I would also use the term feeling to describe the light that comes into your eye is being felt by the back of your eye and being turned into the sensation. And then, similar feeling, but more internally, is feelings like hunger that are, your body trying to tell you something, but they manifest in a way that is not directly describable. And then finally, you have your emotional feelings, something like happiness and sadness, which are...
Okay, I agree with Tracie. He shouldn't be going down this road.
Yeah, we can advance past this because it's purely his conjecture at this point.
Say that what people claim is the soul is...
What do you find so interesting in comments, Tim?
Well, let me...
Oh my goodness, if comments are flying in, I just opened it up on my iPhone.
Right now they're about my beard.
It is white.
Wow, that's the end of the show. That was gripping.
That was the end of the show? That was the last call?
Yeah. For those of you who are asking why we don't call into the show, my advice to you is listen to this entire show. We addressed that. And there's a gentleman commenting, Henson, says, and the presuppositional arguments are being used in the chat. So this non-believer evidently says, my senses are believed to be working based on the efficiency of results. And yes, we can evaluate the results with our senses.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's deep stuff. What's the problem with that, Tim?
He's using his senses to validate his senses.
Right. And how does he know his senses are reliable to bring him to logical conclusions or truth? And this is the conversation I was having with Lee on the last week's video. He was, man, I just lost track of what I was going to say. We were talking about this. Yes. And I asked Lee if there are some people whose senses are not valid. And he said, yeah. And I asked him, how does he know that he's not one of those people? And his response was, this was an interesting one. I in all the years of presuppositionalism, I've never heard this. So let me hear how you would answer it, Len. He says, I read Shakespeare and I know I couldn't make that up because it's too intelligent. That's how I know my senses are valid. All right. To quote a former co-host of this show, I think we're done here. So, I mean, honestly, when you want, this is what we're talking about when we say your worldview reduces to absurdity. That's a pretty absurd statement. So if that's, you know what I said to him? Right, go for it, man. I said, how do you know you're not Shakespeare? Probably, and now you're not thinking logically. Right. How do you know you're not a brain in a vat, bro? And here's the basis for the argument for those of you who want to hear it in more fuller context. There's no way that we can know anything to be true because there's so much knowledge out there available that we could we could receive more information that would cause everything that we believe to be true that to be false. Well, the argument goes like this. If you have 10% of all the knowledge in the known universe, which would be a lot, the problem is the 10% you know could be contradicted by the 90% you don't know, and you therefore do not know or cannot know anything. So to know anything, you either have to know everything or you have to have revelation from somebody who does. And that's why we say that our epistemology, all epistemology, in fact, is revelational. And so that's why we don't say atheists don't know anything. You just can't claim to know anything. It's not consistent to say you know anything. So my son is flashing his fingers in front of my camera.
I see that. I see that.
He wants to hang with me today, so he's being quiet. So he's doing good.
Right. So unless God reveals some things to us in such a way that we know them, we can know them to be true, then we can't know anything. Unless an all-knowing knower reveals what truth is, we can't be certain of what anything is.
It's not just the all-knowing knower. He is the author of knowledge. Everything, Evan, okay, that's enough, son. Everything that can be known, he knows because he made it. God doesn't learn anything, okay? It's not like God observes all of creation, all of the known knowledge. He observes it and learned it. He knows it. Like, this is what omniscience is. He knows it because he's the author of it. He's the author of everything. That's how he knows it. That's how predestination and election works, for example, or reprobation, to use another example. But that's what omniscience is. Omniscience isn't God learning anything. Omniscience is God being the author of all knowledge and then revealing that to us so that we can know it for certain with what we call epistemic certainty. There's epistemic certainty and philosophical certainty. Epistemic certainty is I know that I know that I know that I know. All right? You know. Like the man on the Atheist Experience claiming to be a woman, even if that person has fully surgically transitioned, they know every time they look down at that surgical scar that they're a man.
Yeah.
They just know. So,
Len, what do you want to do? We can take a break and come back. I have other stuff we can cover that would be lovely.
How long have we been going for? About an hour and a half?
I don't know.
I think it's something like that. We can go through the Aaron Ra thing, or we can go through that video that you said we have to watch. You said there's one that we have to watch. We must do.
Which one? The one where the atheist goes through Seitan Brunkate's test? Is that the one I was talking about?
No, there was the one after that.
The one I made?
Of Matt Dillahunty? Was that the one you were talking about?
You have a cheerleader. So let's take a break, Len. Would you like to take a 6-minute break or an 11-minute break?
Are we going to start a new Google Hangout, or are we going to continue with this
we're
one?
going to continue with this one.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, let's take a little breaky. 6 minutes is plenty.
6 minutes. So we're going to beat up on Matt Dillahunty then during our 6-minute break. Oh, actually, this is 9 minutes. We'll go 9 minutes. This is a 9-minute video that I made a couple years ago. If you don't like the music, I'm sorry, but it's there. So I'm going to run this, and we're going to take a break and come back, and we're going to talk about more atheist silliness. All right, 9 minutes. 9 minutes.
We're going to come back in 6 minutes and talk about a 9-minute video, right?
Put that boy back. Put that boy back to sleep. Put him to sleep.
Yeah. Put him to sleep, what, like a dog?
Yeah. Wow. If you are looking for consistency, don't ever become an atheist. You want to offend an atheist? Claim to know anything as truth. They must deny the truth because Jesus Christ is the truth. Jesus Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. So atheists must reject the truth because they claim there is no God. An argument against atheism is that you just became an atheist because you want to sin. I've never made that claim, but many people do. Let's hear what Matt Dillahunty has to say on this issue.
So I'm wondering, have they actually investigated Carrier's claims? Or is this just an attempt to smear someone? Is this just an attempt to poison the well with this common kind of Christian attack of, oh, you atheists, you just love your sin. God has given you over to reprobate minds. You just don't want to live in a world governed by God. Y'all just love to sin. Essentially, the core claim here is that atheists, rather than honestly rejecting supernatural claims on the basis of insufficient evidence, have instead merely looked for some reason to reject the God that they don't want to serve. We're in love with our sin. The problem with this entire line of argument is that it essentially calls us liars. It's essentially saying that, yes, we hear you guys talk about evidence and burden of proof, but you're not really an atheist because of that. You're really just an atheist because you love to sin and you did not want to live under the yoke of God or under the responsibility of appealing and obeying God's positions. They don't offer any evidence of this.
I don't think we need to provide any evidence for this because we'll just let you do it.
And one of the things that atheists often get criticized for is, or I have and others have, is this claim that, well, y'all just want to sin. And we're quick to say, no, I'm sorry, that's not actually it. We actually have reasoned arguments. We've thought about this. We've considered it. It's not just that we want to sin. Screw that. It's okay to not believe if you just want to sin. It really is. And what I mean by that is religions tell people to divorce themselves from who they are, who you are as human beings. Oh, you can't be gay. Screw you. If I'm gay, I'm gay. If you want to call it sinning and you don't think that's a good enough reason for me to stop believing in your God who you think made me and now I'm this way and there's nothing I can do about it, or you want to call it a choice or whatever else, it doesn't matter. Now, hopefully, we come to better arguments and better reasons and justify our positions better later on. But the number of people who actually do stop believing because they want to, quote, sin is probably pretty high. And they're all right to do it.
I don't have to say anything, do I? I don't have to say anything. He has a position and then he changes it. Consistency is not really a goal of atheism. A goal of atheism is one of two things, or both at the same time: to deny truth and to suppress truth everywhere anybody makes a truth claim. That's the goal of atheism. And in doing so, atheists, as they engage with non-believers, what they're doing is they are trying to crush your faith and validate their lack of faith. I don't mean to beat up on Matt Dillahunty, but there's a lot of material out there by Matt Dillahunty. He was on the Bible Thumping Wingnut show, and he claims on the show, as well as other places, he was a believer for 25 years and studied to be a minister.
25 years as a Southern Baptist, studying to be a preacher. I'm not qualified to comment on Christianity.
Oh, I didn't know you were 25 years and studying to be a preacher. I apologize.
He was a devoted Christian. He said this over and over again. But was he a devoted Christian? Did he even attend church? Was he someone who sought to live the principles that he learned in the Bible? Or was he an ignorant Christian, not involved in the faith? Well, that's the thing about atheists. When they get in an environment of debate, they'll say one thing. But when they get in the environment of comfort of other non-believers, you learn something a little different.
I said, okay, I'm older now. God, if you want me to be a preacher, I'll do it. My roommate was an atheist. I didn't want to get to heaven and have God say, you know, here's this guy that you love like a brother, you live with for 10 years. Why didn't you do your diligence and help lead him here? Why is he burning in hell? That's it was your responsibility. So I set out to figure out how to convince an atheist. And that backfired spectacularly.
We are all thankful for it.
He and I never even had a conversation about it. Early on, you know, when we became friends, we realized that our friendship was more important than a difference about religion. And religion wasn't particularly important to me at that time. I mean, I was a believer, but I'm living life. I wasn't even going to church for a period of time there. And I kind of sussed this all out on my own.
He wasn't even into religion very much. He wasn't into it. He had this best friend who was an atheist, but he realized that he wasn't going to let that stand between him and his friendship with his friend. He didn't attend church. He's studying to be a minister. Where, I'm interested, where would Matt Dillahunty go to study to be a minister where you can have a roommate that's an atheist? I would like to know. I speculate that he wasn't in a Bible school. He was taking some courses that were preparing him for Bible school, but he wasn't actually in a Bible school. He was not actually studying to be a minister. And to say that I wasn't really into my religion and I didn't attend a church and now I have a non-believer, I don't want him to go to hell. Well, Matt, you never understood Christianity to begin with. You never did. It's somewhat entertaining to point out the follies of atheism, the follies of Matt Dillahunty, the inconsistencies, but it's also quite sad. This man is lost and he stands under the wrath of God. And unless he repents and believes, he will face an eternal punishment of which it will be horrible. He can't imagine it. But what do I know? That's just a truth claim. What kind of a believer were you, Matt? You tell me. Not going to church, didn't know your Bible. You weren't really, it's a kind of a convenient story, isn't it, to tell Christians, hey, I was preparing to be a pastor. I was studying to be a minister. You know what? It's not really true, is it, Matt? But you don't really like to tell the truth all the time. Matt, you, the one who says, you've said it often, that you would lie on purpose to a person if it would make them feel better. You would lie to that person. Well, how do the people who follow you, Matt, know when you're telling the truth or not? If somebody claims that there is no God, you saying, hey, I agree with that. There is no God. Are you lying? Or are you just making money? Something to think about. All right, intermission is over. Len Pettis is back in his fancy chair. What you eating? What you eating there, Mr. Pettis?
Little Caesars.
Little Caesars. Is that on your diet?
Off plan.
That was, of course, a video I made 2 years ago, like I said, of Matt Dillahunty. How did you like that one, Len? Do you remember it now?
I enjoyed it, but you know what? I'm reading comments.
Uh-oh.
And this Mr. Wagman says, sin is a transgression, and he's arguing with somebody, I think a Christian within the group, and he says, sin is a transgression against a divine law. Most likely there is no divine law. If there is no divine law, there is no sin. Okay, so that's true. 1 John, I believe, chapter 3 defines sin as the transgression of God's law. However, Romans 14, I believe 13, or it might be 13:14 says that Romans, I think it's Romans 14:26 says that sin is anything not done in faith is sin. And Romans chapter 2 says, as well as in the book of James, and I don't remember where exactly, says that knowing the right thing to do and not doing it is sin. So the transgression of your conscience is also sin. So when you know you should do something and you don't do it, that's sin. So you can reject a divine law all you want. You're still guilty of sin, because if the first problem is the assumption that there is no divine law. We know that you're suppressing that truth in your unrighteousness, because Romans chapter 1 talks not just about the suppression of the knowledge of God, but also the transgression of the knowledge of our own personal sin. So that's what I wanted to say coming out of our break, reading comments.
Fantastic. Len, I stumbled upon Raw Man episode 81, Women versus Religion. Did you watch this video? Does that pop up on your feed?
You sent it to me, and I haven't watched it. I'm looking forward to it, though, because you told me some things about it.
Okay, so this is Dr. Abby Hafner. She is a scientist. As you munch down on your pizza, huge bite of a big, fat, juicy piece of pepperoni pizza. She's a scientist. She has a doctorate in zoology from Oxford. She's very smart, Len. She's very smart. And
yes, obvious.
Here she is setting up who she is and what she did. And I found, I think we'll find some talking points, which is what I'm going after here.
All right, go ahead, please.
Right. And so the chapter that I wrote for this book is based originally, the first part is based on a presentation that I now do, which is about the gender binary and the lack of a gender binary in nature. Remember, I've got a PhD in zoology. This is the kind of thing I do for a living. And so I talk about the lack of a gender binary in nature. I posit that the original sex was female. That is to say, when you had the very, very first self-replicating molecule, let's just say it wasn't Adam and Eve. It was Eve. Eve was the very first self-replicating molecule who divided and divided and divided and divided, and sometimes had mutations and set out all kinds of different evolutionary lines. And then eventually competition came into being, because that's what evolution is about. And at that point, being able to swap genes actually became useful, because then if there was a beneficial mutation, then it could be swapped into the rest of the population through gene exchange, i.e. sex. And so the role that males play is basically as genetic mixers. So they speed up evolutionary change very dramatically. So sex is overall a beneficial adaptation sometimes. What it comes down to is that self-replication is actually far more efficient. And obviously you get a clean copy of yourself that way. But on the other hand, if you are losing in a competition, you and your offspring may be better off if you can swap in genes from somebody else. So as I said, this is the role that sex plays. And the role that men play, or that males play in all this, is being a genetic mixer. So it's a very, very important thing. But what this then points out is that because that's all that sex actually is, it means that in nature, there is no one set of gender characteristics or sexual characteristics or anything else. And so I use a lot of examples from nature of animals that do things differently from the way the conservative Christians and the Abrahamic religions say that humans ought to do things. And these Abrahamic religions often base their arguments on their idea of nature. It's often called the argument from nature, which is totally and completely wrong for those of us who actually study nature. So I talk about everything from males that tend eggs and raise chicks, through transsexual fish, which are actually very common. Sometimes they go from male to female.
Okay, Lynn, as a genetic mixer yourself.
Yes.
Some interesting things that she pointed out. Evolution, of course, is all about competition, and she's attempting to debunk Christians who say, man, woman, that's the standard because nature says that's the standard. And so she's looking at nature to say, no, that's not where we get this from. As a genetic mixer, do you have any thoughts on that?
No,
you agree with
I have no thoughts about that. No, of course I don't agree with it, but I mean, because she's importing all of her presuppositions into the argument that, I mean, she as much as said that she assumed that life started with a female. There was no Adam and Eve, just an Eve. And when we see things in nature, when we observe, for example, fish that switch back and forth between genders, things that are asexual, or things that, for example, can reproduce without sex, they can essentially clone themselves. There is no reason to assume that is a justification for transgender humans, because we have let's just review what the scientific method is. Things that are testable, observable, and repeatable. We don't see people cloning themselves asexually. People reproduce through sex. Period. Always has been that way, and there's never been any other way. In spite of any mutations or aberrations, what is the norm? What is the norm? So everything here is based on the assumption that because we see some lower life form doing something, that therefore makes gender not binary, is what I call a stupid argument.
Here she is. We skipped forward about 9 minutes because they got off track. And here she is getting back on that argument that she just started.
Say that I start, therefore, as I said, by crushing the argument from nature. But then I go on to say, so this is what sexual reproduction really is. And this then leads male mammals and birds and so on to resort to a bunch of different strategies for trying to persuade females to mate with them. So, there's gift giving, which humans do, but bowerbirds do too. There's showing off, like peacocks do, but humans do that too. That's kind of the idea of having a really nice sports car or something like that. There is rape and trapping females. That's another way of getting your way in this. It's not nice, but keep in mind, evolution is not a moral code.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and this is what mallards do.
That's what mallards do. That's right. So there are many different ways of trying to persuade a female to mate with you. And part of what
you want to stop now, do you?
Hashtag mallard too. That's what these poor raped mallard. I just hope these mallards have the courage to speak out. These poor female mallards. I hope they just get on Twitter.
Well, this is the problem that the atheist comes up with, right? They walk right into this problem. We're no different than mallards. And
well, it's Hume's guillotine. You cannot get a moral ought from an is. You can't do it. You cannot arrive to a moral position because evolution is a prescriptive process, not a descriptive process. So you cannot get a moral ought from a I'm sorry. I think I got that backwards. So evolution, were it true, could only tell us the way things are, cannot tell us the way things ought to be. So that's why she is saying it is not a moral process. There is no evolutionary process which can account for a meta-ethic. None. Period. Zero. Zip. She knows this. So what separates us from the mallards? Nothing, because you see this bird giving a gift. So people give gifts, and you see peacocks spreading their feathers, and that's why I have a fancy mustache and cool hair, because I'm like a peacock too. So really, we're just all bird rapers, and there's nothing moral or immoral about it. It just is.
Yeah, that's when you strip away your standard for morality, which is what she's trying to do, strip away the standard for morality and say, hey, look at nature, look at everything that happens in nature, and it happens amongst us too. So there, and she said it's not a moral code. She walked right into it, kind of, belittling to women who have been raped, literally.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, former Mallard people that were raped. You're just, there was a man.
It's part of the genetic mixing, right? All it is genetic mixing.
Right. It was just an advantage. This is survival. This is what survival of the fittest is. You have something I need. You cannot defend it. I am going to take it.
Thing at in all of this is that what the conservative Abrahamic religions try to do is it's a combination of showing off. It's like having the biggest big brother on the playground. I mean, there really is no bigger big brother than God. So it's like, hey baby, look who's with me. And so there's showing off. You're also offering a gift, salvation, which is the world's cheapest gift because you don't actually have to give anything. And
so she's equating. It's interesting because she's equating the reason why a man would adopt a religion is to motivate women to have sex with them. That's literally what her argument.
Yeah, how dumb is that?
And if that is happening, even if that was happening, why would she ever critique it? It's just evolution. Like if people are using religion to move forward with the genetic mixing, how is that bad? She's talking about it as if it's negative.
It's no less valid or invalid than Mallard rape. I mean, honestly, let's get down to brass tacks here. Have you observed the anger in this woman?
It comes across that way. I think we actually might know her from Google Hangouts from years ago if you listen to the voice.
Jade?
It's very similar.
Yeah,
that's probably not Jade. But she's in the same category. All right, here we jump again another 6 minutes. They begin to talk about morality. Now she's going to talk about morality.
Right. Ooh, and then there you are. What are you going to do that when it turns out that your imaginary friend isn't real?
And I also want everybody to think about
nobody's going to save you, that no one is going to come to the rescue. One of the things that I talk about a little bit when I talk about morality is we actually have to figure things out. That's what science does. We have to figure things out. We have to take care of the planet. And crucially, we understand the consequences of our actions. And we really ought to act that way.
Wow. Somehow she's got some moral standards, Len. Where did she come up with that? We have to figure things out. We have to take care of the planet, and we have to act as if we can understand the consequences of our actions.
You know what? It might be evolutionarily advantageous for me to firebomb her corner of the planet. And what would be wrong with that? I'm just a genetic mixer, man.
Yeah. She has destroyed any argument for morality, and then she tries to make moral claims.
Yeah, I got a feeling if I exercise my moral advantage to smash her face with a hammer, for example, I don't know, I'm into smashing with hammer. That's the second time I've mentioned that, but I'm just saying, why are you even arguing about morality? she's trying to make the Abrahamic religion. She puts those in an audible scare quote, right? When she says the Abrahamic religion. You know, she's putting an audible scare quote on that. It's like, if you're trying to make us sound ridiculous by framing the straw man of us that you've created, listen to yourself, lady.
All right, now this I found interesting. We now jumped to another talking point. You know how the non-believers will say that God is a moral monster, right?
Right, of course.
So what is the obvious takeaway then from their position? If there is no God, what is the most evil thing that there is?
It's got to be evolution.
Have you ever heard an atheist say that?
No, but I mean, you and I have been having this discussion for a few weeks now, that if there is no God, evolution is a massively wicked process, that we should be trying to pump the brakes on this thing.
Well, I stumbled upon this and listen to her response to Aaron Ra framing the argument that evolution is the most evil thing.
Trying to replicate the disease, right? And so because ultimately the religion is kind of agnostic on the question of whether we are happy or not, whether we're flourishing or not. If our suffering advances the ideology, then that works. And if our joy and
I did start it a minute before I was supposed to.
That's good too.
And either one will reinforce this.
So we'll get
if you get
more of the
if
context.
you have something good going on in your life, well, that's a blessing that has come from God. And if you have a turmoil in your life and you have to suffer through it, well, this also is given as, you know, this is something you must persevere on behalf of your God. So I mean, so somehow being ridiculed and facing adversity is also somehow a reaffirmation of faith. There's no way to falsify this myth.
If I could actually get back to the business of the bad things that happen, as you said, if something good happens, it's a blessing. If something bad happens, you must persevere through it. Or if something bad happens, you must have sinned in some way. And this brings us back to miscarriage, because I actually think that it is cruel when women miscarry and they are told that somehow or another this is their fault, or God was trying to tell them something, or any of these kinds of things. There's plenty of research that shows that basically the female reproductive system is not optimized. It is not good. Nature does not care if an individual lives or dies or suffers or is healthy. What happens in evolution is that enough individuals reproduce that the system keeps going. Basically, for any given adaptation, the standard for success is good enough to not cause death before reproduction too much of the time.
I'm going to give a presentation on this at one point. I'm going to talk about evolution as the cruelest truth, because it's hard, and it would be it's insensitive, and that's actually evil. And just because, you know, I may accept evolution as a fact, but that doesn't mean that I justify it as moral. Evolution is the cruelest thing.
No, it is not to be confused with a moral code. People get confused about that. But the female
there it is. He made the argument and she shot it down. She shot it down.
It is a cruel truth. And I listen to like Joe Rogan's podcast, and it's funny. He says the same thing about like when you're out hunting in the woods and the wilderness and stuff, and like nature doesn't care about you. You're out in nature and a bear kills you and you die. It doesn't care. Nature is cruel. And look, it's true. But you know, he kind of said something that evolution is a cruel truth. And then he went on to make the statement it was evil. I think if we asked him for clarification, he may not actually say evolution as a process is evil, because I would still push him on the same question I would push anyone who's making any moral claim and denies God. By what standard? Look, because you feel this way, your subjective standard of good and evil, you think that evolution is a cruel truth? Like, what is truth? All of the presuppositions being imported into the conversation are rather something that we just have to suffer as Christians when we are refuting the foolishness of atheism. We just have to go through these somewhat murky waters. But I hope the Christians watching this realize that there are no good atheist arguments. There's nothing to fear in facing these claims, these so-called rebuttals or refutations of our faith. That as a Christian, when you hear people who, like those on the Atheist Experience, which is a huge, huge platform for the propagation of atheists, someone like Aaron Ra, like, look, there are atheists who say, well, this atheist doesn't speak for me. All right, well, then speak up. I'm happy to refute you too. I don't need someone who claims to be a representation of atheism to refute atheism, because all worldviews outside of a Christian worldview are false. They're wrong, they're sinful, they're damnable, and they are easy to refute. All you have to do is know your scripture and do the internal critique of the individual that you're talking to and highlight the inconsistencies within their own worldview. Inconsistency, as a friend of ours says, is the surest sign of a failed argument. All right. So all we have to do is just ask questions, dig deep, find the inconsistencies and point on them. And either they will camp on those inconsistencies or they're going to abandon them. But look, we do this with gentleness and respect, as it says in 1 Peter 3:15. And we have to be saturated with the gospel when we do this. We have to let them know that, listen, this worldview that you're putting forth in opposition to the gospel of Jesus Christ is because of sin. And God hates sin. He's offended by it. And if you die in this sin, you will pay the eternal penalty of hell. However, because God is good, gracious, and patient, he has sent preachers into the world to talk about the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ, dying for sinners, so that through faith in him alone, and not by any works of righteousness that you can do, he will save you.
Amen. Amen, amen, amen. So if you liked this, you can get more content, more of this on our YouTube channel. Search Bible Thumping Wingnut on YouTube and you'll find it. You can get more content at BibleThumpingWingnut.com. And if you'd like to help us out financially, you can go there as well and click on support our ministry. And catch Len Pettis's Grappling with Theology. What's happening with Grappling with Theology this week, Len?
The best secular podcast on the network. Tuesday, I believe I have episode 9 or 10 coming out. And anyhow, it is the interview that I did with Law and Shirley Tao. They are the owners of my MMA Academy. They are Christians who they take no profit from their academy. They see this as an outreach ministry, and they use all the profits to support missionaries. They have an amazing testimony. Shirley came out of shamanism, and we talked about shamanism and what that is. We talked about how the gospel came to the Hmong people, like just in the last century, pre-Vietnam era, the pre-Vietnam War era, not Vietnam existing as a place, but yeah, really a really good, fruitful conversation. So go and check that out. That'll come out on Tuesday.
And yeah, more stuff on Dr. Michael Brown coming out on the podcast as well, Bible Thumping Wingnut, and lots of other podcasts as well for you to check out. Thanks everybody for watching. Until next week, take care and God bless. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. Maybe we will read your comment next week.